General David O. Maycomber to build an 8-mile road to the summit. It was a challenging task he set for himself, to say the least, but he had a vision of how tourism would affect the area in the years to come. The White Mountains were beginning to gain a reputation as a vacation destination, with grand hotels being built to cater to wealthy travelers during the summer season. His path to the summit of Mount Washington would surely be the high point of any visit to the North Country. In fact, your presence here today confirms just how right he was. One of the first grand hotels was the iconic Glen House, which was located at the base area from which you began your climb. This hotel, along with 3 others which shared its name, all burned to the ground between 1884 and 1967. For many decades to follow, there was no lodging on the property, but after many years of planning, the latest Glen House opened for business in 2018. Like its predecessors, the new hotel caters to travelers looking for the ultimate White Mountain experience. Unlike the previous structures, however, the new Glen House represents the pinnacle of green building practices and eco-friendly accommodations. Feel free to stop in for a tour or a great meal when you get back to the base area. As you drive upward through the hardwood forest, try to imagine what the early road builders faced. Dense trees and underbrush, steep ridges, and immense boulders and ledges oppose the construction at every turn. This isn't a particularly inviting place to excavate a roadway, but no adversity would be too great if it resulted in the conquest of this famed peak. One young woman who visited the Glen House in 1854, Mary Langdon, explored the work in progress and wrote an article for Harper's Weekly magazine. In it, she recounted her memories of the road during its construction.
We have all been walking in the lowering twilight on the road, which is making its way up Mount Washington. Though nothing is impossible to modern science, it would seem impossible to vanquish the obstacles to the enterprise, the inevitable steepness of the ascent, the rocky precipices. We passed on through debris of blasted rocks, stumps of uprooted trees, and heaps of stones until we got far enough into the mountain to feel its stern solitude.
And when that was written in 1854, they were still 7 years from completion. Unfortunately for General Maycomber, his financial backing ran out about halfway up the mountain. So, it ended up taking 2 companies years of back-breaking hand labor, blasting, logging, clearing, and grading to complete the task. During a 2-year delay after the first company failed, it was questionable as to whether or not the project would ever be completed. But the lure of Mount Washington was too great to keep this road from reaching the top. It was particularly difficult to make any progress when natural obstacles such as the weather combined with the primitive technology of the era to slow things down. Since dynamite had not yet been invented, all the blasting was done with black powder, a dangerous and at times unstable explosive. In order to split the massive rock ledges which blocked the way, individual holes were hand-drilled into solid rock and then filled with black powder, blown up or split apart one at a time. All the logging was done with axes, saws, and elbow grease. Teams of oxen and workhorses drew carts filled with gravel. All in all, it was a dirty, dangerous job, largely accomplished by immigrant labor working in a place not yet fit for man or beast. But finally, on August 8, 1861, the construction was done, and done right. Many decades later, in a study completed with aerial surveys and the latest technology, the Army Corps of Engineers could find no improvement to the route as laid out in the middle of the last century. Today, this toll road is still privately owned and operated by the Mount Washington Summit Road Company, and with very little change in ownership, has remained a family business since 1906. As you continue your ascent, glimpses of pristine mountain vistas begin to reveal themselves, but it wasn't always that way. In fact, around the turn of the century, logging barons had virtually clear-cut much of what is now the White Mountain National Forest. The decimation of these native forests created not only fire and erosion dangers, but created such an unsightly mess that the cause of conservation was taken up by politicians, downstream mill owners, and average citizens alike. As a result, the Weeks Act of 1911 established the White Mountain National Forest, among many others. These mountains remain protected today and stand as a reminder of the natural beauty of the wilderness. It's ironic, though, that it took the near destruction of everything that you see around you to motivate the effort to save it. Thankfully, what you see today is remarkably similar to what the first adventure seekers found in 1861. It was called the Mount Washington Carriage Road in those days, and there were as many as 25 mountain wagons and 120 horses in service each day of the season. These mountain wagons were specially designed and constructed for the carriage road by the Abbott Downing Company in Concord, New Hampshire. This company manufactured the famous Concord stagecoaches, which aside from being shipped worldwide for use in commerce and transportation, were used in practically every Western movie ever made. The carriage road mountain wagons were pulled by 6 horses and seated as many as 12 passengers. A typical trip took about 4 hours up, and though no one was in a rush in those days, passengers were at times asked to assist with one task. On windy days, those making the journey were asked to get out and collect rocks to add weight to the wagon so it wouldn't tip over in the strong winds above tree line. Though it is unmarked today, the halfway point along the road used to be a stopover for guests and horses in the old days. Here, the halfway house offered shelter and refreshments before the last long pull to the top. The ride down took 2 hours and was another adventure in itself. The steep grade and heavy loads meant that the stages wore through a set of leather brakes on every trip, as the horses, driver, and wagon fought gravity the whole way down. Also, the carriage road stages weren't alone on the road by any means. Individual hotels had their own coaches